Simplifying radicals. In math, whenever you see this word simplify, what it generally means is there is an equivalent way to write that expression that looks simpler. Example, look at this square root 4. So I can rewrite this expression square root 4 as 2. And you agree that 2 looks simpler than square root 4. First of all, I don't have the square root and I'm working with a smaller number. Similarly, square root 9 is 3 because 3 square is 9. So these expressions on the right are simpler, whereas the ones on the left are complicated. So anytime you're asked to simplify, you just want to rewrite something that looks simpler but has the same value. You can't change the value. Then it's not rewriting. So these numbers 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, and so on, these are all nice numbers. They all have perfect square roots because these are perfect square numbers. So what are the square numbers? Well, if you ignore the 1, 4 is 2 square, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100. I can keep going, but I think I'll stop there at 100. So these are all good numbers. They are perfect squares. So anytime these numbers are under square root, you're going to get nice integers for your answer. But not always you're going to find those good numbers. So I'm going to put some examples and we'll simplify those radicals. And by the way, these are called radicals. Square roots are called radicals. So say example 1, I have square root of 12. Now 12 does not appear in this list because it's not a perfect square. But here is what I want you to notice. You can break it down as something good and something bad. So 12 is a bad number. So it's going to, you can't have an integer for an answer. But I can break it down as, I want to think multiplication. What two numbers can I multiply to get 12? There are several options, but this one is better, 4 times 3. Why? Because 4 is a good number and of course 3 is a bad number, but at least we have one good number. Now if you broke it down as 2 times 6, then neither 2 nor 6 is a good number. So that's not a good factorization. And also, I want to write the good number first. You might ask, can I write this as 3 times 4? Well, I would say write the good number first. Why? Because you'll see it in the next step, in the next two steps. So now square root of 4 times 3, you can separate them as square root 4 times square root 3. And look, square root 4 is nothing but 2. So it's 2 times square root 3. You just write this as 2 square root 3. Now if you don't have anything in between the 2 and square root 3, it means you're multiplying them. So the answer is 2 square root 3. We started with something that had a big number under the square root, and now what we have is a smaller number under square root. That's why we like to think that this is simpler than this one. If you have a smaller number under the square root sign, it's preferable for several reasons. In this video, we'll look at how to simplify. So that's one example. Let's look at one other example. And this time I'm going to go a little bit faster. So say I have square root 50. Now how do you want to break 50? So 50 is 25 times 2. Now 50 is a big number, but if you think money, 50 cents is made up of 2 quarters. And quarter is a nice number because 25 The square root of 25 is 5. Now, let me skip this step. What I want to think is, oh, I have a square root 25. That can be pulled out. That comes out as 5. But the 2 cannot be pulled out of the square root, so it remains under the square root. So the answer is 5 square root 2. All right, let's look at one other example. What about square root of 18? How do you want to break 18? 18 is 9 times 2. You don't want to do 3 times 6 because they are both bad numbers, 3 and 6. But 9 is a good number to have under the square root. And so 9 square root 9 is 3. The 2 has to be left within the square root. Now, sometimes we may encounter negative numbers. So say, or let's actually do this problem where I'm going to have negative 18. So it looks very much like number 3. But now what I want to think is, I want to think of negative 18 as 9 times 2 times negative 1. So just like before, I can get rid of that 9. I can pull the 9 out of the square root and I will have a 3. And then the 2 cannot come out of the square root. So the 2 will be in the square root. And the negative 1. Now you want to think, what is square root of negative 1? In an earlier video, that's what we defined I as. So I was square root of negative 1. So look at problem 3 and 4. In 3, we had square root of 18. The answer was 3 root 2. And in 4, we have square root of negative 18. The negative under the square root will put an I at the end of our answer. Now, you can put I in the beginning. That's fine too. I like to put I at the end. So let's try one more. What about square root of negative 75? So 75, I know there is a negative under the square root, so that's going to have an I at the end. It's imaginary. Look, square root of negative numbers are imaginary numbers. 75, I'm thinking 25 times 3. And again, I want to think money. 75 cents is 25 3/4. So the 25 will come out of the square root as 5. Then I have a root 3 and the negative will give me an I. So let's try one more. What about square root of negative 200 this time? How do you want to break 200? Well, 200 is 100 times 2. Remember, you want to keep one good factor, one perfect square. So this is going to be 10 because square root of 100 is 10. And then you have square root 2 and an I. I because you have a negative sign. And let's do maybe one more. So this time I want to say square root of negative let's say, or let's just do negative 36. How about that? Well, 36 is in this list. 36 is actually 6 square. So square root of negative 36 would just be 6i. So what would square root of negative 16 be equal to? Well, that has to be 4i. Because 16 would give me 4. The negative will give me an I. Notice, it's just I, not square root of I. So that I has to be outside of the square root in all these examples. Now, if you are using a computer program to type your answer, be sure to come out of the square root before you type I. All right, I think this should give you enough examples for simplifying radicals, and I have some practice problems where some of the numbers under the square root are positive and some are negative. So wherever you have a negative number, you're going to have an I at the end. And all you have to do is break it down. So 8, how do you want to break it down? You want to have a good factor and a bad factor. So 8 is 4 times 2. 75 is 25 times 3. And if the numbers are 162, something like that, you want to ask. You want to start with 4 and ask, does 4 go into that? Does 9 go into that? And so on. And usually you don't have to check very many because the numbers are still small, but sometimes you may have to go up to 49, I think, in all these examples. So good luck with that, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.